Let's bring in Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Behnam, always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us today. Let's begin on this tour that some of the Gulf foreign ministers are doing through China, at China's invitation, I might add. What would you say are some of the biggest issues at stake here, particularly given the current dynamic on the ground where we have China critical to the economic outlook for a lot of these countries, but the US still key when it comes to security as well?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again, and a very belated Happy New Year. In essence, the Chinese are looking to do several things. They're looking to build on some of the signs of hedging that they see from those GCC countries, those Gulf Cooperation Council countries that you mentioned that have their foreign ministers, as well as the Secretary General of the GCC in Beijing for 5 days. Build on the hedging, build on the concerns of the U.S., build on the concerns of the GCC related to the U.S. being a long-term partner. The Chinese in particular are looking to meet with the Saudis. In essence, the Saudis are a swing oil producer, but on many increasing energy and business and financial matters, the Chinese are the swing vote there. And the Chinese are looking to try to marry up Saudi Arabia's domestic energy and political and economic reform program known as Vision 2030 with more of the Belt and Road Initiative. The GCC states, for instance, are also looking to build out some of those economic relationships. You know, there's been talk now between about a GCC and Chinese potential free trade agreement. There have been previous talks about this when the Chinese visited the region, I think about a year ago. And ultimately, the Iran issue will loom large for both sides because China does not discriminate in this regard and purchases oil from both sides of the Persian Gulf and has considerable leverage. And I think the pro-U.S. Order on this side is looking to cash in and try to take back some of that leverage and perhaps change Chinese policy on Iran. But that's ultimately a longer-term goal.
And that's one of the most fascinating things about it, isn't it, Behnam? Because at the same time, clearly China is going to have more influence when it comes to the possibility of a resumption of an Iran nuclear deal. We've seen China and Tehran coming together to sign this 25-year economic and security cooperation agreement. How do you think this might influence the progress of talks on the Iran nuclear deal, which resumed just last week?
You know, I think you mentioned a critical component, which is the bilateral U.S.-China relationship, and that cannot be excised from conversations about the fate of resurrecting that 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA, or about the fate or efficacy of the current U.S. sanctions regime, which is legally present but not as vigorously enforced as some sanctions proponents would have liked. Ultimately, when we talk about even the Chinese being upset in 2021 about the lack of progress made when it comes to resurrecting this deal, when you look at the reality, when you look at the facts on the ground, it's Chinese sanctions busting, it's China's continued illicit imports of Iranian oil that pays for literally the intransigence of Iran at the nuclear negotiating table. So with Iran looking to act on that strategic framework agreement, that 25-year agreement that it has with China now, both in the economic space, later on in the security space, it wants to use this partner, this other near-peer competitor of the U.S. as a bludgeon against America. And vice versa, China, as well as Russia, are looking to use Iran as a strategic pawn in their game of competition with the West and particularly with America.